The world's cameras were pointed at one place, a palace in Europe. Politicians were smiling, diplomats were shaking hands, news anchors were celebrating what they called a historic breakthrough. America and Iran had finally reached an agreement. The Strait of Hormuz was reopening. Oil prices were falling, stock markets were soaring, and millions of people around the world believed the crisis was ending. But what if that wasn't the real story? What if the biggest geopolitical victory of those 24 hours had absolutely nothing to do with America? Nothing to do with Iran? Nothing to do with the Middle East? What if, while Washington and Tehran were busy signing documents, another country quietly advanced its position in ways that could shape the next 50 years of world politics? A country that didn't fire a missile, didn't deploy an aircraft carrier, didn't send troops, didn't threaten anyone, yet somehow emerged stronger than all the countries directly involved. That country was China. And according to many geopolitical analysts, the events surrounding the U.S. Iran crisis revealed something much bigger than a regional conflict. They revealed how global power is changing. Because the most dangerous mistake in international politics is assuming that power belongs to the country making the most noise. History tells us something very different. The greatest powers often rise while everyone else is distracted. While Rome fought endless wars, rival civilizations expanded. While Britain was busy maintaining its empire, America became an industrial giant. While the Soviet Union exhausted itself in Afghanistan, the United States accelerated its dominance, and today many experts believe something similar may be happening again. While America manages crises across multiple regions, China is quietly positioning itself for a future in which global influence is measured not by military bases alone, but by technology, trade networks, artificial intelligence, scientific leadership, financial systems, and diplomatic architecture. The Iran crisis may have been one more chapter in Middle Eastern politics, but from Beijing's perspective, it was also an opportunity to gain influence without confrontation, an opportunity to strengthen partnerships, an opportunity to present itself as a responsible global actor, and, perhaps most importantly, an opportunity to continue a strategy that Chinese leaders have been pursuing for decades. A strategy based on patience, a strategy based on economics, a strategy based on long-term competition. Tonight, we're going to explore how China benefited from the U.S. Iran developments. We're going to examine what leading strategists, economists, military experts, and international relations scholars are saying. We're going to separate facts from speculation. And by the end, you may see the Iran crisis very differently. Because the real question isn't who won the latest diplomatic agreement. The real question is whether the balance of global power is slowly shifting right in front of our eyes, and whether China is positioning itself to become the greatest beneficiary of that shift. For decades, the United States has been the dominant power in the international system. Its military is unmatched. Its currency serves as the backbone of global finance. Its alliances stretch across continents. Its influence reaches nearly every corner of the world. Yet every empire faces a challenge, not necessarily defeat, but overstretch, the challenge of managing too many responsibilities at the same time. This idea was famously discussed by historian Paul Kennedy in his work on imperial overstretch. Kennedy argued that great powers often weaken not because they lose a single war, but because they become burdened by too many commitments simultaneously. Many contemporary analysts believe America faces a similar dilemma. Consider the reality. The United States must simultaneously manage competition with China, support for allies in Europe, security commitments in the Middle East, challenges from Russia, technological competition, global trade disputes, domestic economic pressures. Every crisis demands attention. Every conflict consumes resources. Every commitment requires political capital. China understands this reality better than most. Chinese strategists have spent years studying American strengths, but they have also spent years studying American vulnerabilities. And one vulnerability repeatedly appears in Chinese strategic thinking: distraction, not military weakness, not economic collapse, distraction. The more attention Washington devotes to one region, the less attention it can devote elsewhere. This is where the Iran crisis becomes important. From China's perspective, every additional American focus on the Middle East creates breathing room in Asia. Every emergency meeting about Iran is a meeting not focused on Taiwan. Every naval deployment to the Persian Gulf is a deployment not concentrated in the Indo-Pacific. Every $1 billion spent managing Middle Eastern instability is $1 billion unavailable for other priorities. This doesn't mean China wants chaos. In fact, Beijing often prefers stability. But when instability occurs, China seeks to extract strategic advantages. And that is exactly what many experts believe happened during the recent developments. The first major benefit involved energy. At first glance, the Iran crisis appears dangerous for China. China is one of the world's largest energy importers. Its economic growth depends heavily on access to reliable energy supplies. A significant percentage of Chinese oil imports originate in the Middle East. Much of that energy passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Any disruption threatens Chinese interests. Yet the story is more complicated. Over the last 2 decades, China has systematically prepared for energy uncertainty. Chinese policymakers watched previous wars. They studied sanctions. They analyzed supply disruptions. And they concluded that energy security was a national priority. As a result, China pursued multiple strategies simultaneously. It built strategic petroleum reserves. It diversified suppliers. It invested in pipelines. It expanded renewable energy production. It increased nuclear energy development. It deepened relationships with energy-producing nations. The result is a level of resilience that many observers underestimate. When energy crises occur, China certainly feels pressure. But Beijing often possesses greater flexibility than expected. Meanwhile, rising oil prices can create inflationary pressure across Western economies. This creates a fascinating dynamic. A crisis that appears dangerous for everyone can sometimes create relative advantages for countries that prepared better. And preparation has become one of China's greatest strengths. The same pattern appears in diplomacy. For decades, Middle Eastern politics revolved largely around American influence. Regional governments looked toward Washington for security guarantees. American diplomacy shaped negotiations. American military power underpinned regional order. China largely remained on the sidelines. But that is changing. Beijing has gradually increased its diplomatic presence. It has cultivated relationships with Iran. It has cultivated relationships with Saudi Arabia. It has cultivated relationships with Gulf states. It has cultivated relationships with Israel. Unlike many powers, China often avoids choosing sides publicly. Instead, it emphasizes economic cooperation, infrastructure projects, trade agreements, development partnerships. This approach allows Beijing to maintain relationships with countries that may not get along with each other. The Iran crisis created another opportunity to reinforce this image. While others debated military responses, China consistently emphasized dialogue, stability, and negotiation. Whether one agrees with Beijing's policies or not, the diplomatic messaging was clear. China wanted to appear as a force for stability, and in international politics, perception matters enormously. A nation doesn't need universal approval. It simply needs enough countries to believe cooperation is beneficial. That brings us to perhaps the most important aspect of all, the battle over the future international order. Many people think geopolitics is primarily about tanks and missiles. Those matter. It is taking place in conference rooms, in technology laboratories, in ports, in universities, in financial institutions, and in the minds of world leaders trying to decide what the future international system should look like. For nearly 8 decades after World War II, the United States occupied the center of that system. The institutions that governed the global economy largely reflected American influence. The global financial system revolved around the dollar. International trade relied heavily on American-backed rules. The world's most influential military alliances were led by Washington. But today, China is proposing something different. Chinese leaders frequently speak about a multipolar world. At first glance, the phrase sounds technical and harmless, but its implications are enormous. A multipolar world means a world where no single country dominates global affairs. A world where multiple centers of power coexist. A world where Beijing, Washington, Brussels, Moscow, New Delhi, and others all exercise significant influence. To many countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, this idea is appealing. Many governments feel uncomfortable relying too heavily on one superpower. They prefer options. They prefer alternatives. And China understands this. That is why Beijing has spent years constructing institutions, initiatives, and partnerships designed to expand its influence without directly confronting America. The Belt and Road Initiative is perhaps the most famous example. Launched in 2013, it became one of the largest infrastructure projects in human history. Ports, railways, industrial zones, power plants, roads, telecommunications networks, across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Critics argue that some projects create debt dependence. Supporters argue they provide desperately needed infrastructure. But regardless of one's opinion, one fact is undeniable. The Belt and Road Initiative dramatically expanded China's global footprint. Today, when leaders across the developing world think about infrastructure financing, China is often part of the conversation, and this matters because influence follows investment. Countries rarely separate economics from politics. The nation that builds your roads often gains a voice in your future decisions. The nation that finances your ports often gains access to strategic opportunities. The nation that invests in your development becomes a stakeholder in your success. China understands this principle deeply, and the Iran developments reinforced it. Because while Western media focused on military calculations, Beijing focused on connectivity, trade, and economic integration. This is a recurring pattern. While others focus on crises, China often focuses on the long game. And the long game increasingly revolves around the Global South. The term Global South refers broadly to developing nations across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and parts of the Middle East. Collectively, these countries represent the majority of humanity. For decades, many of them felt marginalized within global decision-making structures. China has positioned itself as a champion of these countries. Chinese officials frequently argue that emerging economies deserve greater representation, greater influence, greater respect. And whether this message is entirely sincere or partly strategic is almost beside the point, because the message resonates, particularly among governments that believe the current international order disproportionately favors Western powers. This is one reason China's influence has grown significantly within international organizations. It is also one reason initiatives such as BRICS have attracted so much attention. What began as a grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has expanded into something much larger. Today, many countries see BRICS as a platform for reducing dependence on Western-dominated institutions. Again, this does not mean BRICS will replace existing structures overnight, but it reflects a broader trend: the gradual diversification of global power. And every geopolitical crisis accelerates discussions about alternatives. The Iran crisis was no exception. As sanctions, trade restrictions, and financial pressures dominated headlines, many countries asked a simple question: what happens if we become the next target? This question has profound consequences, because it encourages governments to explore alternative payment systems, alternative trade arrangements, alternative financial networks, alternative partnerships, and China is often ready to provide them. This leads us to one of the most controversial topics in modern geopolitics: the future of the dollar. For decades, the U.S. dollar has enjoyed extraordinary advantages. Most international trade is conducted in dollars. Central banks hold vast quantities of dollar reserves. Global commodities are typically priced in dollars. This gives Washington immense influence. Financial sanctions become powerful because the dollar sits at the center of the system. China recognizes this reality, and Chinese policymakers have spent years exploring ways to reduce vulnerability to dollar dominance. Notice the wording carefully. Not destroy the dollar. Reduce dependence on it. There is a difference. Many commentators make dramatic predictions that the dollar is about to collapse. Most serious economists reject such claims. The dollar remains deeply entrenched. Its financial markets are vast. Its institutions remain influential. Its liquidity is unmatched. Replacing it would be extraordinarily difficult, but gradual diversification is another matter entirely. And this is where China's strategy becomes important. Rather than trying to replace the dollar immediately, Beijing is attempting to create options: more yuan settlements, more bilateral trade agreements, more currency swaps, more regional payment mechanisms. The goal is flexibility. The goal is resilience. The goal is reducing vulnerability. And every geopolitical crisis strengthens the argument for diversification. The Iran developments provided another example. Countries observed how financial tools could be used as instruments of statecraft. Many concluded that depending entirely on one system carries risks. China was prepared to offer alternatives. Not complete alternatives, not immediate alternatives, but alternatives nonetheless. And that is often how major transformations begin, not with revolution, but with gradual adaptation. The same pattern is visible in technology. For years, analysts assumed the future global economy would be shaped primarily by military power. Today, many experts argue technology may be even more important: artificial intelligence, quantum computing, semiconductors, biotechnology, advanced manufacturing, cyber capabilities. These technologies will define economic competitiveness for decades, and China is investing heavily across all of them. The numbers are staggering. Every year, China produces vast numbers of engineers. Every year, it expands research spending. Every year, it files thousands of patents. Every year, it strengthens scientific capacity. This does not mean China dominates every field. Far from it. The United States remains a technological powerhouse. American universities remain world-class. American innovation remains extraordinary. But the gap is narrowing in several sectors, and that reality has enormous implications, because future power will increasingly depend on who controls the technologies shaping everyday life, who develops advanced AI systems, who manufactures critical chips, who leads biotechnology breakthroughs, who controls digital infrastructure. These questions may ultimately matter more than temporary military confrontations, and this is another reason China benefited indirectly from the Iran developments. While attention focused elsewhere, China's technological machine continued moving forward. Research continued. Innovation continued. Investment continued. The competition never paused. In geopolitics, attention is a resource. And sometimes the greatest advantage comes from operating while others are distracted. The same pattern becomes even clearer when we examine technology, economics, military strategy, and the future balance of power simultaneously. Many people assume that global power is determined primarily by armies and weapons. History certainly shows that military strength matters. However, the greatest strategists understand that military power is only one component of national influence. The countries that shape the future are usually those that dominate multiple domains at once: economics, technology, finance, diplomacy, science, and military capability. This is precisely where China has focused its efforts over the past 2 decades. While America was fighting costly wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, China was building factories. While Washington was spending trillions of dollars on military operations overseas, Beijing was investing heavily in infrastructure, manufacturing, research, and technological development. While American policymakers were managing crises across multiple regions, Chinese leaders were implementing long-term industrial strategies designed to strengthen their country's economic foundations. The result is one of the most remarkable economic transformations in human history. In just a few decades, China evolved from a developing economy into the world's second-largest economy. It became the manufacturing hub of the world. It established itself as a dominant player in supply chains that touch almost every product used in modern life. From smartphones and solar panels to batteries and industrial machinery, China's presence became nearly unavoidable. This transformation did not happen by accident. It was the product of strategic planning, long-term thinking, and an understanding that economic strength eventually translates into geopolitical influence. And this is why events such as the U.S. Iran developments matter so much from Beijing's perspective. Every time Washington becomes deeply involved in a geopolitical crisis, China's leaders gain valuable time and strategic space to continue pursuing their broader objectives. Think about it this way. Imagine 2 runners competing in a marathon. One runner constantly stops to deal with unexpected obstacles along the route. The other runner encounters fewer interruptions and can maintain a steady pace. Even if the first runner remains stronger overall, the second runner gradually closes the distance. This analogy helps explain how many Chinese strategists view American foreign policy. The United States remains extraordinarily powerful. Its military capabilities are unmatched. Its universities are among the best in the world. Its economy remains innovative and dynamic. But maintaining global leadership requires attention, resources, and political focus. Every crisis consumes some of those resources. China's leaders understand that they do not necessarily need America to fail. They simply need America to remain occupied, and this idea becomes even more important when we examine the technological competition currently unfolding between the 2 powers. Artificial intelligence is expected to transform economies, industries, and military capabilities over the coming decades. Countries that lead in AI development may gain enormous advantages in productivity, innovation, intelligence gathering, cybersecurity, and military operations. China recognizes this reality. Over the last several years, Beijing has invested heavily in artificial intelligence research, machine learning applications, semiconductor development, and advanced computing infrastructure. Chinese universities produce hundreds of thousands of engineers annually. Chinese technology companies continue expanding their capabilities despite restrictions imposed by the United States and its allies. Meanwhile, the competition extends far beyond artificial intelligence. Quantum computing represents another frontier. Whoever achieves major breakthroughs in quantum technology could revolutionize encryption, communications, and scientific research. Biotechnology represents another battleground. Advances in genetics, pharmaceuticals, and medical innovation could reshape economies and improve national resilience. Renewable energy technologies are equally important because future economic growth will increasingly depend on sustainable energy systems. China is investing heavily across all of these sectors simultaneously. This does not mean China is guaranteed to surpass the United States. Far from it. American innovation remains exceptionally strong. Silicon Valley continues to lead in many critical technologies. American research institutions remain among the most influential in the world. However, the key point is that China continues advancing, while geopolitical crises distract global attention. When headlines focus on military deployments, sanctions, and diplomatic negotiations, research laboratories continue operating. Scientists continue publishing studies. Engineers continue developing new technologies. Investment continues flowing into strategic industries. The competition never pauses. And according to many experts, this uninterrupted momentum is one of China's greatest advantages. The same logic applies to scientific research. For much of the 20th century, the United States dominated global science. American universities attracted the world's brightest minds. American laboratories produced revolutionary discoveries. American institutions became symbols of innovation. Today, however, China has emerged as a scientific powerhouse. Chinese researchers publish enormous volumes of scientific papers. Chinese universities climb global rankings. Chinese investments in research and development continue increasing year after year. Fields such as chemistry, materials science, renewable energy, telecommunications, and applied engineering have witnessed particularly strong Chinese performance. Scientific leadership matters because it ultimately translates into economic and strategic power. Every major technological breakthrough begins with research. Every advanced weapon system depends upon scientific innovation. Every future industry relies upon discoveries made today. When viewed through this lens, China's rise becomes far more significant than many observers initially realize. Yet, perhaps the most fascinating aspect of China's strategy is its patience. Unlike many political systems that focus on election cycles lasting a few years, Chinese policymakers frequently think in terms of decades. Infrastructure projects are planned years in advance. Industrial strategies often span decades. Economic initiatives are designed with long-term objectives in mind. This patience allows Beijing to pursue goals that may not produce immediate results but can generate enormous advantages over time. The Belt and Road Initiative illustrates this perfectly. When China finances ports, railways, roads, and industrial zones across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, the benefits are not always immediate. However, over time, these projects strengthen economic ties, expand trade networks, and increase China's influence in regions that were once dominated by other powers. The Iran developments created another opportunity to strengthen this approach. As countries witnessed the vulnerabilities associated with conflict, sanctions, and geopolitical uncertainty, many became increasingly interested in economic partnerships that promised stability and development. China was prepared to offer exactly that. This brings us to another critical issue: the future of the international financial system. For decades, the U.S. dollar has served as the foundation of global commerce. Most international transactions are conducted in dollars. Central banks hold dollar reserves. Commodities such as oil are generally priced in dollars. This system provides Washington with enormous leverage. However, many countries have become increasingly concerned about their dependence on a financial system largely controlled by one power. China has responded by encouraging greater use of its currency, the yuan, in international trade. It has established currency swap agreements with numerous countries. It has promoted alternative payment systems and explored mechanisms that reduce reliance on traditional Western financial channels. Again, this does not mean the dollar is about to disappear. Most serious economists reject such dramatic predictions. But the direction of travel is clear. More countries are exploring alternatives. More countries are seeking flexibility. More countries are attempting to diversify financial risk. And every geopolitical crisis accelerates these conversations. The U.S. Iran developments provided yet another reminder that economics and geopolitics are deeply interconnected. Finally, we arrive at the most important lesson of all. History rarely changes because of a single event. Great power transitions are usually gradual. They unfold over years and decades. Individual crises may appear decisive in the moment, but their true significance often becomes visible only later. The Iran developments were not simply about diplomacy, oil prices, or regional security. They were also another chapter in the broader story of competition between the world's two most powerful nations. While America focused on immediate challenges, China continued pursuing long-term objectives. While policymakers debated the latest crisis, Beijing continued expanding trade networks, strengthening technological capabilities, increasing scientific output, enhancing diplomatic influence, and positioning itself for a future in which global power may be distributed very differently than it is today. And that may be the most important takeaway from all. The biggest winners in geopolitics are not always the countries that dominate the headlines. Sometimes they are the countries quietly preparing for the future while everyone else is focused on the present.